Special edition of Forever Bristol City podcast. I've called it an end of season review, which is a bit cheeky, seeing as there's 8 games remaining. Somebody said the other day that the championship consists of 24 clubs, the top 10, was it? No, the top 11, the bottom 11, and Bristol City and Preston, perennial mid-table clubs. I'm delighted to be joined today by Chris Honor, former player and respected journalist for very many years. And we travelled to lots of away games together back in the 80s and 90s. Richard Latham. Gentlemen, I'll start with you first, Richard. Thoughts on the season so far? Is it cheeky to say the season's over? Because we're not going to challenge the top. I think we got too many points to go down. What do you think?
Yeah, I think the season's over as far as both those things are concerned, thankfully, because at the start of the season, I feared Bristol City would struggle this year. I didn't see where the goals were coming from. In a successful team, to me, you've always got to have a 20-goal top scorer, or maybe if you haven't got that, 15-goal top scorers. And there's nobody I thought of. And Tommy Conway was always probably going to get double figures, but you couldn't really see 15 to 20 at the early stage of his career still. So I couldn't see where the goals were coming from, and I wasn't sure how strong they'd be in midfield or defence. So I was quite happy with how things were going under Nigel Pearson. Didn't get on with Nigel great. Difficult character sometimes to get on with. I'm sure the people at Bristol City found that as well. But I didn't think he should have been sacked. I saw no reason for that. And of course, he'd done the job with Leicester that Bristol City weren't doing. So he had that background. Bringing in Liam Manning was always going to be a risk because Bristol City fans were always going to say, "Well, where's his experience? Compared to Nigel Pearson." Having said that, Liam was highly regarded as a coach, or is highly regarded as a coach. He's a lovely guy. I wish him nothing but the best, and I think it's far too early to judge him. Simple as that. So I'm happy enough with where City are. I think that's as good as it could be this year. They are, with the squad they've got, a mid-table championship team.
Okay, no, I think that's a very balanced approach and picked up a load of topics there. Chris, your views season so far. I mean, Richard said about what his expectations were going into the season. Those fans, I call myself a fan. You always have hope, but Richard very pragmatically says, we are where we are. He feared worse. What are your thoughts right now?
I think you've got to always temper that hope, being a Bristol City fan, haven't you? Whether you're a former player or a fan or whatever. It's just been a really disappointing last few months. I thought there was a little bit of hope around Christmas time with a couple of really decent results against Borough, Watford, obviously Southampton, a decent run in the Cup against a couple of Premier Division sides. And then we just showed our mental weakness. I think we fell away poorly, and 5 defeats in 6 games just isn't good enough. It's unacceptable as a football club. I think the hierarchy would be disappointed because it showed, it basically, showed that their decision to get rid of Nigel Pearson was the right one. But in the last few months, that's now being challenged, and a lot of people have questioned that decision. I was another one who felt that Pearson sacking was not controversial, but questionable. I wouldn't go too far. I thought Nigel was doing the right job. He brought a strength in the dressing room, a mental strength. His experience was invaluable. And I think with Liam Manning, he comes across as a great guy. I've got a lovely story. I met him a couple of weeks after he took charge. I came out of the Robbins TV studio after doing a game and was introduced to him. And he said, if you ever want to come up to the training ground and see what we're trying to achieve on the grass, so you're more informed about what we're trying to achieve, come up to the training ground and see what we're trying to do. You'd have never got that from Nigel Pearson. Nigel Pearson was old school. Nigel was tough, rugged, experienced. Man management probably is top of his game, the priority. I just wondered whether nice guys make good managers or man managers, and I don't know whether Liam's got it in his repertoire. We'll soon find out, and it's just a real bit of a disappointment. And here we are talking about the end of the season with 8 games to go.
Yeah, interesting. You've both got views about Nigel's approach and Nigel's sacking. I mean, Richard, do you think the board have made a rod for their own back by bigging up the qualities of the squad. And I've said on the podcast on a number of episodes that the fans are using Liam Manning as a stick to beat the board's back with for not spending enough of the Scott money and the Semenyo funny. Now, we know we've got losses in the past that need to be addressed in some shape or form, but to say we've a top 6 squad or even a top 10 squad and we're bringing in a coach to make it better, it raised expectations rather badly, rather too much, I would say.
Yes, because they didn't have a top 6 squad. I mean, how can you have a top 6 squad when half the clubs in the league getting parachute payments? A lot bigger clubs than Bristol City. At best you had a 6th or 7th place squad. At very best, I would say. And I don't really think they had that. But it all comes down to the old thing that we've all seen over all the years. Bristol City are a selling club, and the only thing that I get upset with when the board go on, or John Lansdowne meeting, which I don't think he should do, is when they say they're ambitious to get into the Premier League. If you're ambitious to get into the Premier League, you do not sell Alex Scott for 25 million and not spend. And over all our time, I go back to way before this, but Andy Cole was a good example, who came to Bristol City, signed for 500,000, club record signing at the time, but was absolutely outstanding, probably the best striker I've ever seen play for City. Yep. And had an outstanding sort of, how many months was it? But about 3/4 of the way through the following season, they couldn't wait to get rid of him to raise some money, and eventually sold him for 1.7 million to Newcastle. His next move was 9 million.
We didn't even have a sell-on clause there, Richard, did we? For goodness sake.
No, but the point I'm trying to make, Dave, is that until Bristol City get a really outstanding player out of their academy, or they sign them and build the team around him rather than sell him, that's when we might start to see the chance of Premier League football. Until that happens, and all this about we couldn't stand in his way, or that the way to stand in someone's way is offer them enough money, for one thing, and you've got to perhaps break your wage bill sometimes for a player who's already on your own staff, because to keep the bloke. Because every time we get a young player, I go back over the Lee Johnson era, where in one summer, Joe Bryan, Bobby Reid, Aidan Flint left. Another summer, you got Lloyd Kelly, Adam Webster. You can go on and on and on. But Webster had been Player of the Year the previous season. If you keep selling those sort of players after 1 year, and they go into the likes of Brighton or Bournemouth, who are comparable clubs over my time covering Bristol City, that is not going to get you promotion in a tough league like the Championship. And I think in view of the money they've made and the sales they've made, where they are is pretty good, to be honest. I think, and I don't care who's manager. It doesn't matter if you've got an experienced Nigel Pearson or an inexperienced Liam Manning, who's a very good coach. And by the way, there's a big difference, I think, between being a good coach and a good manager, which Chris might comment on. But until you get rid of that policy and someone is there who will say, right, this is a guy, we've nurtured him ourselves, and Alex Scott, okay, they put a price tag on him, 25 million, and people say, well, Bristol City can't turn down 25 million. And that's, over my time, been absolutely true. And obviously that's an inflated figure with inflation over the years, but they've never been able to turn down big fees. But if you never turn down a big fee, how are you ever going to build a team with your best players in it? And I think this is where the supporters just, the ones who see the longer term view and the overall, I'm not interested in people who go on social media the week they've lost in Pan Manning and the next week they've won and he's a great coach. I'm not interested in them. I'm interested in the senior Reds, or the people who've seen things over a long time. I think what they get despondent about is, where's the marquee signing? Where is the marquee signing after selling Alex Scott? Why didn't they make at least one signing then?
That's good. That's a good point. Chris, underachievers because we always seem to sell our best players, and you look at the fans, the old stages, Richard's quoted Brighton, Bournemouth. I mean, who'd have thought even 12 years ago we'd be a feeder club for Bournemouth? Yeah, we've got an owner that's invested £150 million or thereabouts in infrastructure, but has also funded £150 million in losses over 20 years. Some people have achieved a lot more for less, haven't they? What is it about this club that we are in this logjam? The one thing Nigel did, what he did do was put us through a reset that at least twice in my time as supporting City, probably more than that, we usually end up going down to League One and come back again. But back to the point, what Why? How do we get out of this cycle? What needs to change?
I think the biggest problem is, David, is that the majority of clubs get promoted out of this league because they've got the best players. There's no doubt about that. And if we're going to sell our best players, we're not going to get promoted. But then owners start having a look at, the likes of Luton getting promoted or Bournemouth getting promoted with smaller squads, smaller budgets. Even Ipswich this year, hopefully on a crest of a wave with a bit of momentum, jumping up a couple of divisions very quickly. And they think, do you know what? It can be done on the cheap. But generally, you cannot do it unless you've got the best players, unless you've got the best team spirit you possibly can in that dressing room. And that's when it comes down to the man management side or the best coach. So if you've got the best coach with the best team spirit, you don't need the best players. But if we continually sell our best players, which actually drives every supporter mad, as Richard just said, it breaks your heart because all you're doing is giving them away, for 25, 30 million or whatever you send them to the likes of Bournemouth, who I don't consider as a big club at all. My friend is an ardent Bournemouth fan, and he tells me how great Semenyo's doing and Alex Scott's doing on a weekly basis, and it breaks my heart. But my only thing I will say about the money they got in recently, did they have one eye on the FFP issues that have now hit Leicester, which now have hit Nottingham Forest? Is there more debt in the background that we don't know about? Perhaps they need to bring more money into the club just to get rid of some of the debt that they had accrued over the last few years. That would be my only question, but you can't keep selling your best players and expect the conveyor belt to keep bringing players through, because we're just going to be that mid-table club. So as Richard said, don't keep selling us the dream. Don't keep insulting us, because we're not that stupid. We're not going to go anywhere unless you keep a good nucleus of your best players together. And when you do get some money in, buy some good players to replace them. Simple.
I mean, Richard raised the point about paying the player, and Alex Scott says, paying him a wage to make him stay. Yeah. But let's say, and I'm going to pluck figures out of thin air, that Alex Scott was on a contract that he might have been being paid $5,000 a week, and City might have offered him 12, which is a substantial increase, and Bournemouth offer him 30. Yeah.
Well, make it hard for him, but make it harder for him, David. Offer him 20. Because they were paying.
Okay, but then how do you feel as an ex-player? And this is an argument that's put forward about wage structure. How would you feel when you were a player? Yeah, if your star boy was on 3 times as much as you, but by being a member of the team, he was helping you get promoted to the next level, such that you might be able to negotiate a better deal for yourself next time than you would do without him being there.
Well, absolutely. Players get their heads around it. They don't. They're not stupid. They know that, prize asset within a club is always going to be to the betterment of the team. And if it increases your value as well, and if you get promoted, you're going to get a pay rise, players get their head around it. They're not stupid. They know which players they might resent it for a moment when the player turns up with a brand new car in their car park. But that lasts about 30 seconds when they realise what good he's doing for the side and for the club in general. So, yeah, it's a nonsense. I think what has happened over a long period of time since the Lansdowns have been there, they've been stung a few times. They've paid big money for the like of Naki Wells when he first came in, David James going back a decade or so, and it hasn't worked out. Even Casey Palmer recently, they were paying these guys big money to come from the likes of Chelsea, and they just saw it as money badly spent, and those players haven't stepped up to the mark. So I think they've been starved. They've become a little bit cynical, which is probably through their experiences. They've chucked a lot of money at the club, and sometimes they only want the best for the club. Like us all. They're trying to do their best, but unfortunately, over a couple of decades now, the infrastructure's improved, but the team on the pitch hasn't.
No, very good point. One of the questions that was asked in local media, a survey of fans, and it was, how do fans feel about the overall governance of the club? And I was one of those contributors. I know Chris has read the article. And overall governance of the club. This is what I put. I put poor. Pearson's exit was poorly managed. I've said this a few moments ago. Fans are using Manning as a stick to beat the board with for not spending more of the Scott money. And then I said they would get some respect if they held their hands up and say, things has not gone as well as they had hoped. A decline in season ticket sales would be a bit of a wake-up call. Richard, 12, 15, 18 months ago, we had Richard Gould as a chief exec and Nigel Pearson as manager. And we felt we were going the right way. If we're sat here now, right, we do not have a chief exec other than somebody who's been promoted from finance within the club. We've got John Lansdowne and we've got Brian Tinian. The level of expertise at the top, yeah, I would say it's been stronger than it is now. Yes? Would you agree with that?
Well, any criticism of the Lansdowne, I have to temper with the fact that where would City be without them? Without Steve Lansdowne, where would City be? And I think they'd be almost in a similar position to Bristol Rovers, who have basically now, they've been comparable clubs over the years, and we've been watching, you know, we saw Rovers beat City to the third division championship in, was it 89, 90? Rovers were always competitive with City. Look where they are now. They've got no ground to speak of. The ground's ramshackle ground. They've got no training ground to speak of. They've got, you know, and how on earth are that club going to get anywhere near even to where Bristol City are today, let alone the Premier League, you know, and there was always dreams of even the lower clubs of getting to the first division at some point. So without the Lansdownes, who knows where Bristol City would be? You might say there'd be another rich owner coming. I don't believe that. In all our time before the Lansdownes, there was never a Bristol businessman who wanted to come in and put serious money into Bristol City. So, and Bristol Rovers had to go abroad for their backers in recent years, you know. So there isn't people in Bristol prepared to back Bristol football. So what Steve Lansdowne's done has been unbelievable, and he may well only be recognised for it when he's gone, because be careful what you wish for, the people who want the Lansdownes out. Look at the clubs who've had foreign consortiums come in. Cardiff were meant to play in red under their consortium when they came in, and their nickname's the Bluebirds. No tradition, no feeling for the club at all. Be careful what you wish for. We're lucky to have a local person, I think, in running Bristol City over the years he has. Having said that, and the other thing is they couldn't do much about Richard Gould leaving, because Richard's gone to a job he wanted. Top job. I'm sure they would have loved to have kept Richard. I think he's the best administrator I've ever worked with, and I'm sure it was a great benefit for Bristol City to have him not just then, but in his first spell with the club when they had a lot of their concerts that were very successful. Richard was involved in a lot of that when he worked with Colin Sexton, but we couldn't stop him leaving. He went to a job that he wanted. So that's that. My big gripe is, Dave, and I think the fans are entitled to this, is if you sell a player like Alex Scott for 25 million, you spend 12. I understand that. I think what Chris said is absolutely right. In the most recent cases, there has been the thought of the financial fair play rules and all that, and that City were very close to breaching them, I understand, very close. So I'm sure some of the financial dealings over the last year or two have been to put that right. And that came about, I'm sure, partly from the Getty said the signings from Chelsea, bad recruitment for the money they paid for it, paid for these players. Okay, so that's then not the Lansdowne's fault. That then is the person who's recruiting, whether it's the coach or the manager, or it's Brian Tinian now who's head of recruitment, whoever it is.
Back then, sorry to interrupt, Richard, with all those examples, it was under the tutelage of Mark Ashton and you know, the clubs in the bag and everything like that.
Mark Ashton shouldn't have been picking the players, should he? He shouldn't have been identifying the players. I mean, his expertise, if there is any, was in running a club. He's not a football expert, so it's who you've got making the decisions. A club like Bristol City cannot afford to spend 8 million and make a mistake. You know, once they do that, they're setting themselves back a long way. So that comes down to then who have you put in charge of recruitment? At the moment it's Brian. They have got a huge job and a huge responsibility that over this coming summer, when Liam Manning is bound to try and sign a striker, it stands out a mile, and I've asked him about it, and he's already said, yes, we've got to get another striker. I hope a more physical presence up front to go with the likes of Conway and Bell and these people. But they cannot afford to make a mistake the next time they spend. And that is a huge responsibility, because you try and sign a striker these days, a goal-scoring striker, and you're going to need to spend double figures in millions without any
look at Ellis Sims, who Coventry signed, and Coventry raised similar money from the sale of, Gokkeries and Hamer, and they went out and signed, they spent at least 20 million and 35 they got. Chris, what are your views on that? I said about governance, and I'm sure Richard's got a view as well on this, but, you know, Richard Gould left, but under advice, Steve did appoint Phil Alexander in, and that must have been a bit of a shock that he left as chief exec. He was Premier League chief exec of the year. They brought in that expertise at the top, but he left unexpectedly after barely 6 months 6 months service. But overall, and we've got to be thankful to Steve for the money that he has put in, and he's created a legacy that's going to expand further with the sporting quarter development that will take place eventually. But what do you think about the level of expertise that exists at the top now to run a football club that's playing probably in the 5th strongest league in Europe?
Yeah, again, I agree with mostly what Richard said. We've kind of had a chief executive run the club, whether it's Mark Ashton, Phil Alexander, Richard Gould, but we've gone away from that. We've now shared their tasks or his tasks by appointing 3 individuals, someone on the football side, someone on the finance side. I don't know whether that's working. It's not working in my mind because we're not getting the results I think we expected, but it might be working in the eyes of the Lansdowne. I don't know the runnings of the club, but unless you see the success on the pitch, you've got to query that and how that's when you've got a chief executive running the football side, and I don't see that at the moment. You've got to question whether that's working. So that's something for discussion, definitely. The comparison between Bristol City and Rovers, I think, is excellent. We were comparable, and if it wasn't for Steve Lansdowne, where would we be today? The infrastructure is amazing. Maybe one day when they think about putting another statue up in the city centre in place of Colston, it might be Steve Lansdowne for his philanthropy in the city. He keeps half the city happy, whether it's rugby or football. And most of us enjoy our sport, so I'm all for doing that one day. And again, Bristol City can't make mistakes with £8 million signings. It's not just the £8 million signings; their wages over the next 3 or 4 or 5 years, which we struggle to absorb because our income isn't big enough. But I think I think there's something going on in the background. I think it needs to be sorted out. It's a way that the club can have a go at the Lansdowns, and I just think we really, really do have to be careful what we wish for. Again, as Richard said, because I think they'd be brilliant for the club. I would hate the colour of my stand to change colour to red, and you hear some horror stories from some foreign ownership, and at least he's a Bristolian, he's trying his best, and we should be very grateful. But that's it.
But how do we break out, with the very, I was 68 at the weekend, it's been 44 years since we last had top level football at Ashton Gate. Yeah, I can't, I'd like to, I think the last time they were out of the division, it was 1911 to 1976, 65 years. So if we have a similar wait, hopefully I'll still be here. But how do we break out of that cycle? Because we're saying we're grateful to the Lansdownes. They're going to carry on chucking money in, funding losses every year, probably between 8 and 15 million. Yeah. The fans want entertainment. They want something, and
I think the only way you can break it, David, is by being braver, and then you've got to be prepared to lose money. I mean, we were so close on so many occasions, and maybe 1 or 2 signings away from having that team that got us that ultimate goal, that promotion, whether it was the Corey Smith era, whether it was the Joe Bryan era, when those teams were really flying high. But now I look at that team, we need 6, we need 8. I don't see any of that current team getting in the team of the season. Yeah, when we had that fantastic run in the FA Cup with the Corey Smith goal against Man United and the City getting knocked out, I reckon there was 2 or 3 players who made it into the league team of the year, and I don't see one of them making it at the moment. So we're a long way off. We're years away. Whilst, sometimes you've got to seize the opportunity when all that team looks so great as it did, a decade ago. That was when we had to add to the squad, not now. I mean, it's just a rebuilding game.
Yeah. Richard, Chris used the term being brave, and you went back to say when we didn't put a sell-on clause for Andy Cole, we took the money. And if you look at the times where we woulda, coulda, shoulda in terms of being brave, I mean, let's go back to the 2007-8 season. That's 16 years ago now, when we got to the playoff final. it was under Steve's chairmanship, right? And that winter, that transfer window, we went out and we bought Dele Adebola. Yeah. I think we bought Nick Carl as well, but we failed then when Steve Cottrell got us up. Allegedly, he went out and was going to buy Andre Gray, or was it Dwight Gale? Even Harry Maguire. He was bold. Yeah, he spoke out. Those deals were allegedly brought from underneath him. And then if we go to the Lee Johnson season that Chris has just alluded to, then 17-18, yeah, when we were on Wolves' coattails at Christmas, yeah, we had the cup run. Yeah, that January transfer window when we could have pushed for it again, we had 48 points from like 23 games. We went out and bought in Luke Donny on loan and Liam Walsh, if I recall. Steve being brave, you have got to go for it sometime. And is he got that in his? A lot of people say he's lost a bit of interest because he has lost so much money. Do you see it being a case of Steve needing to be brave, Richard?
I agree with Chris that it's a long-term job now. I think that what they've got to do now is almost go back to basics. And you've got an academy now that's got fantastic facilities to train at. It can attract good young players. That's down to Steve Lansdown and his money he's put into the High Performance Centre. So kids will come to Bristol City. You've just got to continue developing your Alex Scotts. In recent years, it's funny that there was a time when the academy produced barely anything. Over a period of time, Cole Scouse was about the only player that came through the academy over about 8 or 9 years. But they had some decent experienced players and managed to have some success without that. More recently, we're producing players out of the academy, but either selling them too soon or not getting full value out of them as far as winning points in the league is concerned. So you've got to bring those two things together. And to me, it all comes down to recruitment. And if it's Brian Tinnion now who's in charge of recruitment, to me, he's the most important person at the club at this particular time, because if they don't make the right signings this summer, they can go the wrong way, not just stay where they are. The Championship is such a competitive league. I do believe now they've got to make a marquee signing this summer to keep faith with the fans. Whatever happens in between, they've got to get in a striker for a certain amount of money that makes people think, yeah, God, they're having a go for it. And that's what it comes down when Chris says about being brave. Have a go for it. Now, it might be coming to the stage where Steve's almost at his last time where he might have a go for it. Because, he's not getting any younger like the rest of us. I can't believe you're only 68. But, none of us getting any younger. We all want to see this happen tomorrow, but it isn't going to happen tomorrow. It's going to happen through planning. If people said now Liam Manning's going to be there in 3 years' time, I'd be happy, because somewhere along the line you've got a solid base. You've got to get a solid base. You've got to get. This is going to be the guy in charge. Keeping on changing manager is another thing that Bristol City. I think I've worked with 26 or 27 different Bristol City managers, and that's over a period where Terry Cooper was manager for 6 years, Gary Johnson was for 5 years. So, the others have lasted on average about a year or 18 months. Yeah. Now, you can't keep doing that because they bring their own staff in. It changes everything again. So you've got to have a solid base. So if this is the guy they got faith in, show faith in him. Say, right, I don't care what people say after tomorrow's defeat. This is a guy who's going to take our young players, coach them properly, and that one will get the most out of them. So that's the first thing. Second thing, when the young players come through and succeed, we don't sell them at the first opportunity. And thirdly, we go out and recruit. And the next 2 or 3 signings they make are going to be absolutely pivotal, because if they get them right, I can see it's something to build on in this team. I don't think there's anything wrong with the team spirit. I don't think there's anything wrong with the commitment. The reason they lose 1 week and win another is they're not good enough. So you can turn on a performance like they did against Southampton, which was brilliant, and on the night, wonderful football. And then you can have 2 against Cardiff and Swansea, where the football was absolutely abject to watch. And it's the same players, and it's not because they're not trying. It's just because they haven't got the ability to keep that consistency going. They need some help. Basically, they need some help.
All right. I talk about that. Chris, you've said they need 6 to say half a dozen players. Yeah, Richard said about building the side. I mean, we got a situation this summer where our principal striker, and Brian Tinnion said in open forums, that Tommy Conway's been offered contracts, isn't signing it. Tommy was a flatmate with Alex Scott. He's probably seen Alex Scott and go up and quadruple his wages playing at the top level. Tommy Conway's going to be going out through the door this summer, being played in the lone striker role. It's not suiting his game. So I would say that under Liam Manning, his value may well have gone down rather than gone up. Yeah. And he doesn't seem to be, I've seen him look happier when he's been out on the pitch than he does at the moment. So if Tommy goes, yeah, I don't think we get more than 5 million for him. Cam Pring might have a few suitors sniffing around. Yeah. But let's say in the summer we raise 5 million from the sale of Tommy, and we still haven't spent even half of the Scott money. Do you think Liam Manning would be given a £10 million, I'll ignore wages, £10 million transfer budget this summer? Yeah. And will we buy 4 players at 2.5 million, which isn't a marquee signing, but seems to be the average value for a decent championship player like Knight? Or do you see us going out and spending 2 times 5 and the associated higher wages with a player attracting that sort of value? Chris?
I think we have to go for both. And I would be disappointed if they only gave the manager 10 million. And I'd be even more disappointed if I saw the back of Conway and Cam Pring. I mean, they're 2 of the players you want to keep. They've got local connections. So the fans love that feel of the local lads being involved. Obviously, Conway's had his head turned. Someone's had a little word in his ear. I don't think he's playing well. I certainly don't think he's the finished article. I think he'd be a fool to leave. I really do. I think if he went to a bigger club, I think he'd get swallowed up because he certainly isn't as good as possibly thinks he is at the moment. I've seen I don't think his movement's great. We all know he's a good finisher, but his finishing has disappeared a little bit. But again, it's probably the way and the manner that we're playing. It's a slow building game. He doesn't come short a lot. He doesn't link up very well, and he's still got to work on that aspect of the game. So if he goes to a bigger club and he thinks he can, I think he'll get lost and drowned. So I personally think he's better off for another season at Ashton Gate. But money talks, and it's down to the Lansdowns to sort out his wages. I think there's going to be a bit of a clear out in the summer. I think Joe Williams and Matty James are obviously, their contracts are up in the next year or so. I think Matty James is mentioned that he wants to go rejoin his family up in Manchester, so he'll be out the door. We've obviously got Max Bird coming from Derby. I mean, he's in a bit of a conundrum. It looks as if he's going to help Derby get promoted, and they're going to have a little bit of momentum, and he's going to end up coming to us. So he'll want to prove his point, and I'm excited about him joining the club. I think that we have to spend some money. I think, if the Lansdowns are serious, and we'll soon find out if they are or not, I think 15 to 18 million would only scrape the marrow. I really do. And I think that's the rebuilding that we need to have. We've got a small squad, and we've certainly noticed what injuries have done to a depleted squad this year, or a small squad already. We've lost Naismith. We've obviously had the double injuries to the cruciate ligaments on a couple of the players. Centre half, I'm trying to think of his name.
Rob Atkinson.
Rob Atkins, yeah. I mean, that's bitterly disappointing for him because he's a lovely lad. But every club has injuries. It just you only focus on the ones at your own club, but when you've already got a small squad, it doesn't help. So yeah, we need to go out and spend some money, and I look forward to the summer and see how it progresses.
Okay. Richard, that number Chris has said between 15 and 18 million, and I guess that assumes Tommy goes because he's going to depreciate in value. Some City fans will say, yeah, that sounds really good. Can you really see that happening? Yeah, this summer?
I can, particularly if someone leaves. It's very easy to say go and spend. It's all about recruitment and who you recruit. There are players out there for 5 or 6 million that you could get that would improve the team, obviously. What you can't do is spend 5 or 6 million on someone who doesn't improve the team. And that's been the case so often in my time covering Bristol City. We've sold a good player and replaced him with a lesser player. And that might be because you spend a lot less and they want to make a big transfer profit. But whatever, rather than pay the money to keep that player at Ashton Gate, they will spend more on bringing in a lesser player. And that's what's been happening for years Years and years. And that's not just in the Lansdowne era, by the way. That's successive eras of Bristol City. Because of Bristol City are the size of club that even with Steve Lansdowne's money, they are not guaranteed, as we've seen, to get success. And if we don't get success with Steve Lansdowne's money, when are they going to get it? You know, and this is an absolute, what makes this next period so crucial is that it probably will be Steve's last however many years. He's not going to go on forever. And we cannot now afford to make any mistakes at all in the transfer market this summer. And that comes down then to you appoint a bloke who you think knows a good player. They've given up Brian Tinian the responsibility of head of recruitment. They think Brian knows the player. He's done a very, very good job in the academy. It's a very, very different job to go out and sign with the responsibility of spending the club's money. And how Brian takes to that, we'll have to wait and see. But what I'm saying is, if we don't get it right this summer, how many more summers are we going to be talking like this? Because we will find a time when the Lansdowne money disappears, and I'm not sure John will stay on. And once Steve leaves, there's no indication of that whatsoever. You know, I mean, John's in the position that he is because Steve's put him there, basically. And I'm not sure he wants it. And I certainly don't think he wants the stick that he's getting from social media. Who would? I mean, social media to me is a bane of football. I hate it. I think it was a good idea in principle, but as far as football is concerned, it's leading to balmy decisions. It puts pressures on boards to get rid of managers far too soon, and these people are only interested in tomorrow's result. And if they come to the ground and see a 2-0 win, they'll be happy. And if they see a 2-0 defeat, they're going to want the manager out. And there are now, I think someone said the other day that apart from about 3 managers in the Premier League, Pep, Klopp, and maybe one other, managers are under pressure when they lose 3 or 4 games on the trot.
Yeah, you're 4 games away from a crisis.
Everyone says the same, but nobody does anything about it. It's not good for football. And sooner or later, a board have also got to be strong enough to say, no, we're going to ignore these people. You know, they wanted him out. Now they want this bloke out. Now they want the next bloke out. You know, and it's always we want him out, but they don't say who they want next. And so then what we end up with this crazy situation. Oh, we'll advertise and see who's interested, and then the people that are interested don't come up to the expectations of the fans. They want Frank Lampard, they want Steven Gerrard, they want, well, baloney. You ain't going to get any of them. So you're going to get the same list of people they consider like B candidates. So they're not happy with that either. So it's just get rid. But nobody comes up with, well, what we're going to do differently. Okay, now do you want a Neil Warnock? Do you want Neil Warnock to come in at his age and play the sort of football Neil plays? I love Neil to bits. He's got the best record of anybody getting teams out of the Championship. I think and away from the pitch, he's a wonderfully charming, nice guy. I can assure everybody of that. But if you're opposing him on the pitch, he's a devil. But he's a nice guy, Neil Warnock, and he's very, very intelligent football-wise. What I'm waiting for, Dave, is someone to buck the trend of these coaches playing this back and across football, because I find it totally boring. I don't know what Chris thinks, but you watch a game. There are a lot of Championship games now where the teams are good enough to play in front of each other. They can defend against that. Everybody can defend against that. And there's not the individual flair. There's not the wingers we used to see. And I'm, for one, I'm sick to death of it. I've seen football played what I call a proper way. 4-4-2, big centre forward, fast bloke alongside him, big centre half, fast bloke alongside him, 2 wingers who can go by people, get crosses in. That's exciting football. When this back and across football is at its worst, it's like watching paint dry. And that's been the case, I'm afraid, a few times in recent times at Ashton Gate. But Liam's not the only coach playing it. Every coach.
Well, they're all doing it. It's the modern way. Chris, you wanted to jump in before and pick up on the points there, and I want to raise a point that Richard said as well. But what were the point you were going to say about, I think it was money and players and...
Well, no, I just wanted to say about the transfer targets. Not only do they have to be better than what you've got or to fit into the team structure or be the right player for your team, they've got to be able to fit into the dressing room. And that is the hardest thing. That's why you need a football person, hopefully Tins, who goes out and does his research on the individual. I know so many people still in football, and they go out and buy a player and then make 3 or 4 calls to their former managers, their former teammates, to find out about the personality and how he fits into any dressing room. Because no one wants a bad egg in the dressing room, because that can ruin everything. So, you know, you might earmark the right player to come into your team or club. And do you know what? He might upset the whole dressing room, and that's one thing you don't want. But going back to the boring football, Richard, I mean, I quite enjoyed the energy levels of Nigel's team. I liked how Manning shook it up and gave us a little bit more structure, especially going forward. You could see what they were trying to work on. But now they're just passing far too many balls sideways.
Well, they're doing. Sorry,
bear
Chris.
It's becoming boring. It's torture. I've got so many texts from my group of friends who are on a WhatsApp group saying exactly the same. Am I going to renew my season ticket because I cannot watch this kind of football? When you receive the ball, you've got to almost be on the half turn, not facing your own goalkeeper and going back. There was 1 or 2 times when I saw Gardner Hickman this season, who's been a reasonable signing, and we've got decisions to make about him. I think they're pretty much in play. But there's times he's received the ball on the edge of the box and the ball's ended back with the goalkeeper. He should have getting the ball in the half turn, getting himself turned, getting out to the wide men. We've got to work out how we want to play the game and be a little bit, we've said brave earlier about the owners, but the players need to be braver, and so does the manager. And I can't accept that kind of football because it is dull. I can't watch that every Saturday. That's rubbish.
Well, and that's the thing, Richard. You were crying out there for a style of football that we want to see, and the last winger we had was Nicholas Eliasson, and you look at his record of assists and what have you, and he could never command a first team regular place for us. And just to backtrack on transfers, I think as a club we've gone out and signed 5 players. We signed 10 players at $5,000 a week rather than 5 players at $10,000 a week to get extra. And more recently, case in point, the transfer window of signing Mehmeti and Harry Cornick, both of whom wouldn't be anywhere near anybody's first starting 11. The wages and the cost of those two, why not buy one decent player and back what you're doing? And I think the thing is with Liam, you're right. He had that little flurry before Christmas when they beat Watford, Sunderland and Hull. Great games. We more than held our own in the cup competitions in 4 matches against Premier League sides, only conceded 1 goal in open play in that. Then there was the Southampton game that we'll probably have a celebration shirt for that in 30 years' time, the day we ended their run. But the football, Liam is a possession-based guy, and it seems as though he's regressed and he's almost become scared himself. And, this isn't me criticising, this is what other people have said, is in-game management of substitutions has been poor. I think if it wasn't you, Chris, it was Gary saying on Radio Bristol, when we lost at West Brom, he left it another 20 minutes before he made the changes. And I'm going to throw this to both of you, right? He has not got alongside him an experienced number 2. If you go back, Joe had Jimmy Lumsden, an old head. There's 2 very inexperienced guys there. Do you think he would benefit by having an old head alongside him or sat up in the director's box? So Brian's forte is the academy and recruitment, but what about somebody who can, and I think you said he's a nice guy. He doesn't seem to have the ego that Lee Johnson had. He'd never let that happen. But, do you think there's a call for somebody who can give a bit of a steer? Because Liam is trying to get this squad to play a type of football that is totally different to how Nigel set the team up to play and how recruitment had been built for the last 2 years. Richard, you first, and then you, Chris.
In a word, no. I don't like directors of football. I don't like people who the manager can turn to. The manager's got to take responsibility, or the head coach, as he's now called. I go back to John Ward, Benny Lennart's, and the club decided John Ward had just got promotion, needed some help, bring in somebody from abroad, Benny Lennart's. And who was going to pick the team? Who was going to determine the tactics? So now when Brian Tinian talks to Liam Manning, who's picking the tactics? Brian Tinian or Liam Manning? Who's saying who should play? Brian Tinian or Liam Manning? It's got to be Liam Manning, because that's his responsibility. And only one person can take that responsibility. And he doesn't want Neil Warnock in his ear saying, I think you should do that, and Brian Tinian saying, I think you should do that. And so, no, I think that's a case of too many cooks.
Okay. Sorry, Rich, I had to interrupt one point there. You said about John Ward. He had Benny Lennartson imposed on him. I think you'll confirm if this was right or wrong. Didn't John Ward want Rob Harford to come in and help him? I think. Remember
Ray Harford.
Ray Harford, the ex-Luton manager. I remember that at the time. John said, I need help. And he could have gone for Ray Harford, but whoever was in charge at the time brought in Lenny had brought in Benny Lennartson, and I can remember we'd just beaten Bolton in a Sky televised game, and this was announced, and I was doing club call back in the day, and I was trying to say to John, don't resign. Yeah, but anyway, back to the point. John,
his position was made untenable, Dave, because
when Lennartson came in, it was.
He said, "Who's going to pick the team? Who's going to determine the tactics?" Well, it's going to be Benny. Well, in that case, what am I doing? So, but I can see that. I could see that happening, and I don't like. I think director of football is a term that gives you somebody who's got a lot of power but no responsibility. You know, who knows who there was a guy called Keith Burt. Do you remember? Who's director of football at Bristol City? How many fans actually accused Keith Burt of doing anything wrong? It's the buck stops with the manager. So a director of football is a lovely title if you can make the decisions, but you're in no way held responsible by the fans. So I don't like that position. There's always been a manager, and the old school managers wouldn't have tolerated anyone else. Have you got enough faith in Liam Manning? If you don't think Liam Manning can do the job, then don't have him.
Okay.
You don't give him help. I think you say to him, we realise you're inexperienced, you're learning the job, but we've got faith in you. You've got to show total 100% faith in him. And I still say, until they get some stability and think of a manager that they're going to hang around with for a specific period of time, I don't see anything happening, because a new bloke comes in, he's got different ideas, wants different players, and I don't like that. It's the managerial merry-go-round that is causing so many clubs problems. And this about one final point on the boring football. Bristol City aren't alone. This is going on all around the country. Rebelling against this sort of football. Now, when I first started at the Evening Post, I took a preliminary badge coaching course, and at that time there was a textbook written by a bloke called Charles Hughes, and every coach was expected to follow this textbook. So every coach was being coached by someone who said, this is how we do it. And it seems to me that in recent years, there's been this game captain where this is how it's done. This is how football's played. We play back and across. And the only teams that can make a success of it are the brilliant ones like Manchester City or Barcelona or Liverpool, who've got players who can suddenly turn that. Yes, they seem to be playing slowly into a one pass. Somebody makes a move, and they're clever enough and good enough to pick them out. And if you don't play it forward pass, Chris has just alluded to back and across, and it drives me spare, because all it does, it gives the opposition time to line up, mark your forward players, and they're looking at you playing in front. Now we'll get the ball. Now we're playing in front of you. But Bristol City aren't alone. This is a thing that's hit English football, and it's something that I want changed as soon as possible. It's just going to need one innovative coach to say, no, we're not going to do that. My goalkeeper's going to kick it up to the tall centre forward, and he's going to knock it on. And I don't mean that should be the whole thing, but we want wingers. We want
variability. We want to play like Postecoglou does at
it's stereotyped. At the moment, it's stereotyped.
Yeah. Chris.
Positive. No, it's funny. Charles Hughes I thought was a disaster for British football, English football, because his philosophy was 3 passes and it had to be a cross or a shot. And I remember that coaching manual on it. It used to drive me insane, because every single manager jumped on the bandwagon, and it was painting by numbers. They all did it, and I remember the coaching, Terry Cooper example. Just looked at him, just laughed. Anyway, but you're right. A whole generation went down that route, and as Richard just said, it seems to be history repeating itself all over again. Everyone's playing the same kind of football, and it's all very nice and pretty to the eye. But it's very slow. It's not what the British people expect, because we've had that era of getting the ball forward. But there's a happy medium between the two. When you've got half a chance to play the ball forward, you must play it forward, because you'll never get a shot on target. Otherwise, you'll never get a cross in the box. You won't score goals. That's the bottom line. But going back to the director of football, when you mentioned that, I would love that job. I mean, what a great position that must be. Like you say, you don't get criticised. you just sit in the background. You roll the manager out onto the field on a Saturday. He gets all the flack, and you take all the praise and all the money in the background. It's brilliant.
Okay, I hear that point, Chris. But imagine you were manager, right? And as your assistant, you had, well, I can't think of a name, but somebody who was, one of your teammates at City back in the day, but wasn't a regular, didn't have a massively good career, right? And in the middle of a game, you're the man, you pick the side, but he's there as your assistant, and you turn around to him and ask for advice, right? And he's not even had as good a playing career as you have, or a comparable average career. And the alternative to that is, Chris, you're now manager, right? And your assistant manager is Joe Jordan. And Joe I'm just using him by somebody that we all know. Joe, you're in the middle of a game and you're stood on the edge of the technical area and you think, shit, what do I do here? And you can go to Joe, wise old head, right? And he'll say, I won't do the Scottish accent, but he'll say something and you'll think, okay. I don't think Liam has got that with Hogg. No disrespect to the lad.
But you've got to remember, Liam hasn't played at a high standard himself. So he's just straight out the coaching manual. He has learned his trade from 21 years of age, all up the coaching manual, but he hasn't been a player. So it would be possibly in his best interest to have someone of some playing ability, some experience behind him. And possibly of a different era to give them a little bit more of a rounded perspective on the way the game should be played. I mean, that's something that he needs to sort out in his own head. I mean, because he's a very intelligent guy. He seems very pleasant. And I presented that story to you earlier. But he has to have trust in a second man or an assistant whose opinion he values. And it's also in his best interest to be a successful manager. He has to find someone that he can work with, whether it's on the coaching pitch, whether it's on the touchline on a Saturday. But at the moment, I think the club needs to be braver in lots of areas, and I think Liam as well.
All right.
I think that's the topic of the conversation. I mean, I wrote down something before I came on, actually. He's become too obsessed with possession without penetration because there isn't anything. You know, in that last third, and I've said it too much on the radio and too much on the TV, we run out of ideas and we have nowhere to go, and that's what we're missing. Whether it's the centre forward that Richard is after, or a playmaker who can make it happen. And Twine was the one that we were hanging our coat hook on. He's come in, he's been injured. He looked okay in his first game. He ran himself into the ground, got himself injured. We haven't seen anything from him since, so we don't even know whether we're going to get him at the end of the season.
No, but I wouldn't, based on, well, we haven't seen hardly anything, but again, you know, Burnley probably coming down and then wanting 4 million. Is he the answer? I don't really know. I mean, look, I call this the end of season review. There's 8 games to go. You know, if you look at the next 3, it doesn't come much tougher than a faltering Leicester, it has to be said, a local derby away at Plymouth, who are even closer to the bottom of the table than we are, and then Sunderland away up at the Stadium of Light. 3 tough games in their own. Well, there's no easy games in this division before home games against relegation strugglers. I mean, Richard, we're not going to go down because there's too many clubs below us that need to accumulate. But the pressure that you don't like coming from social media, perish the thought that we got 1 point from the next 3 and starting with a loss against Leicester at home. Yeah, they've got to hold their nerve, haven't they, and back their man in the summer.
I'm still laughing at the prospect of Chris Honor as manager and Joe Jordan as assistant. I don't think that's ever likely to happen.
No, I forgot. Not a good combination.
Joe with number 2 to you. Well, I'm not sure I can foresee that. So what are we talking about? I mean, there shouldn't be any pressure on Liam Manning between now and the end of the season. He's not been there a season. He's not made a signing of any note. You know, that he's got to be the one that they sort of like hold their nerve. They won't want to admit they were wrong. So it's not a case of holding the nerve. It's more likely that they'll stick to Liam Manning because nobody wants to admit they're wrong. And if they got rid of Liam after less than a season, then they're saying we should never have got rid of Nigel Pearson. So going to happen. Liam Manning is going to be head coach next season, as far as I'm concerned. I don't care who goes on social media and says otherwise. They might as well lump it because that's what's going to happen. And I'm not sure that's a bad thing. I think that we still got to see what the bloke's made of. He's inherited a squad like all new managers do or head coaches do, and he's got the faults that go with that squad and the good things. They might beat Leicester and lose to Plymouth. With this team, you just don't know. You cannot tell.
You don't know.
They're just as likely to beat Leicester as any of the other ones they've got playing. And if they lose to Leicester, they're just likely to go away and win somewhere else. Doesn't matter now. I mean, they'll finish with 50-odd points probably,
Probably.
and that's going to be mid-table. If they lose every game between now and the end of the season, well, I wouldn't even see that making a difference.
No.
But that isn't going to happen. They're not that bad. Defensively, they've got a decent central defensive partnership now with Dickey and Viner. It's a shame about Atkinson, and they probably need a bit more cover there. They need cover virtually in every position. So it's a massively important summer. But Liam Manning's going to be overseeing it, and I can't see why that shouldn't be the case. He's got to be given a chance.
Okay. Chris, final point from you before I go back to Richard on some sad news. But Chris, final point from you. I mean, 8 games to go, 47 points we're on. Last season's point total was 59. Success right now would be getting to 60 points, which is 1.5 points a game, 8 points. No, 13 to get to 60, isn't it? I think we can get 13 points from the last 8 games. It'd certainly be a boost for season ticket sales, wouldn't it? Because that would be a decent end to the season if we did that.
Managers always remind players that there's always something to play for, whether it's the last game of the season or mid-season. There's always someone watching in the stand. There's always a contract to play for, or working on your fitness, or whatever there is. Managers always remind the players there's always something. So they will be trying to the last game. But as we all know, Bristol City are more likely to beat Leicester and Norwich and lose against Rotherham, Blackburn and Huddersfield. Probably Stoke will need to beat us to stay up at the last game of the season. So points are definitely at a premium. It's going to be an interesting 8 games, and it's a difficult run-in for a lot of them. The Plymouth game which is over Easter, I think, Good Friday. I think everyone's going to be looking forward to that game. It's an away trip. We haven't been down there for many years. And they're absolutely good at home. There's one player I actually would love to see at Bristol City, and that's
Whittaker.
But apparently he's off to Lazio. I mean, I read that the other day.
Well, that's a bit different.
And that's when I realised we had no chance. So, because no one's going to pay that kind of money.
Richard, just to wrap up, and I say I'm very grateful for you participating in this morning's recording. But it's a very sad news. A very good friend and journalistic colleague of yours, Graham Russell, sadly passed away today at the age of 95. I mean, I can remember when I used to sit in the press box in the 80s and 90s, Graham there. What a great character. And I expect you could talk for a whole hour about experiences with Graham over your 40-odd years career. But, great man, Graham, wasn't he?
Larger-than-life character. The only journalist I've ever met locally who drove around in Rolls Royces, the succession of Rolls Royce cars. Very, very funny man, sense of humour, joy to be with. He saved my career in a way because I was going through a bit of a bad time at the Evening Post in the early 90s, and it wasn't a pleasant place to work. And I went into partnership with Graham in his news agency that he had, and the times we had, Dave, wonderful man to work with. Learned a lot off him. A guy who could do 5 reports for different newspapers of an evening game, and ad lib 5 different reports at the end of the match. With just a few notes in front of him. That is the skill of a freelance, as opposed to me, who used to write 1 report for the Evening Post. But generally, he worked for the Sunday People, Sunday Independent. A lot of people will have known Graham. He was 95, had a wonderful life, so we mustn't be too sad about it. But it was bad news for me to hear today.
Yeah, and the end of an era, really, because a few years ago, David Foote and Peter Godsiff, I mean, they, with yourself as a youngster back then, but they were the guys who were the dominant characters in the press box 40 years ago when we were in the top flight. They saw all of it and reported on it, didn't they? As you did at the very start of your career.
They were my mentors, yeah, and I learned an awful lot from all of them. And from Graham, as I say, it was the art of freelancing, which is the art of trying to take as many orders as you can for each game and be able to fulfill them properly without letting anyone keep anyone waiting for too long. He was a master at doing that, and but most of all, a wonderful company and a great guy.
Excellent. No, great tribute. And I'm sure there'll be many more in the coming days. Guys, Chris, Richard, thanks ever so much for joining me today. And the next podcast that we'll be recording will be a review of the Leicester game, which is lunchtime kickoff on Good Friday. So I think we'll be doing that at 6 o'clock. But everybody, thanks a lot for